and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Fiona Ibáñez-Leach. Now, Fiona is the Diversity and Inclusion Head globally for international markets at Walgreen Boots Alliance. She believes incredibly passionately about unlocking potential to drive high performance through inclusive business practices and sees diversity and inclusion as a strategic business imperative. She's also on the steering council for DAR Global, which is fantastic. She has a huge amount of expertise internationally, and so we are absolutely thrilled to have her and delighted to have her here on the show today. So Fiona, welcome.
Thank you, Leila. I'm really pleased to be here with you today having this discussion, albeit virtually.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for here and obviously for being here. And we talk about the virtual environment that we are in. It would be remiss of me not to ask you before we dive into how you actually came to be where you are today and your interests within diversity and inclusion, but also to ask you first and foremost how you're coping when it comes to COVID-19 and obviously the impact that this has had when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the role that you do.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a conversation on everybody's minds at the moment, and a very relevant conversation given that all of our leaders are almost focused entirely on how we manage through this and manage out of this as well. I think there was a tendency when it first kind of came to be to think that diversity and inclusion maybe should be put on the back burner and that it wasn't the right time to land some of our initiatives. What I've observed in the more recent weeks, both internally and with some of my external colleagues, is that we're really trying to reprioritise and dial up the inclusion piece especially. So as an example of that for our organisation, we actually have diversity and inclusion goals for our senior leaders across the organisation, which focus both on increasing representation of diversity in leadership, but also on fostering an inclusive climate within your teams. And we report out on that on a quarterly basis. And for this last quarter just gone, we really dialed up the inclusion element. So the key things we focused on was advice for leaders around ensuring that they still prioritise that daily check-in time with their leaders in their organisation and the team members in the organisation, that they also show some vulnerability themselves, that, you know, this is an unprecedented, as we keep saying, global pandemic, and nobody's expected to have all the answers about everything to do with it. And so that openness and that vulnerability to share with team members can often really instill that psychological safety for team members to feel like they don't need to have all the perfect answers throughout this for their work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's gone some way, I think, towards creating the right conditions. And with D&I think the main thing is always to be as relevant as possible. And so one of the things that we as a global team are doing under my boss, Carlos Cubia, the Global Chief Diversity Officer, is reevaluating our strategy and thinking about, from an employee-centric perspective, what are the things that are going to be really on people's minds at the moment. And that feeling of connection and inclusion definitely needs to be right up there at the top from what we're hearing from our team members. So there's just some things that we're doing to continue the diversity and inclusion conversation, but to make it more simple, more relevant to what teams are feeling today.
Thank you so much for sharing, Fiona. And I'm absolutely thrilled to hear how high on the agenda this is. I think it's so easy almost for organizations and individuals to panic when it comes to, obviously, the pandemic that we're facing right now, and to think, well, perhaps D&I should not be prioritized, when actually what you said there and articulated so perfectly, as you always do, is the fact that inclusivity is really key to making sure that we have and foster that real sense of collaboration with our teams, both within the UK and also internationally, because we don't have that real kind of that human sense of purpose and intention and such. It's very hard to really kind of drive engagement and make sure that we are delivering on what we set out to achieve, which of course, a lot of the time we don't necessarily know where we may stand now in the future with challenges that are afoot. But if we stick together, I think that's half of the battle.
Absolutely.
But anyhow, Fiona, I'm curious to share with our listeners a little bit about how you actually came to be where you are today. A little bit about your personal story. I know that I'm very lucky because I have the opportunity to have had the opportunity through DAL to get to know you personally. But I'd love you to share with our listeners how you personally got so involved in D&I and a little bit about your career, because it's been a real kind of strong linear upward trajectory. So how did that happen?
Sure. So I actually, when I joined Walgreens Boots Alliance, I had been in a number of commercial roles, really. So account management, key account management roles. I'd worked in Johnson & Johnson previously. And I joined this big organization in a commercial coach role, which meant that I got to meet lots of different teams in a short amount of time. And what I observed was that our customer was almost always primarily female. And the teams I was working with were mainly female teams, actually, of buyers, category managers, etc., etc. And yet, actually, I didn't see that same representation in leadership, and I was just intrigued by that more than anything. So I enlisted the support of a colleague as well, a colleague and good friend of mine, and we did some research, internal and external research around best practice in this area, what was kind of the norm, what was some of the insight was. And we socialized that as far and wide as we could using our internal networks, until eventually we got a meeting with the then president of the division that I was working in, Ken Murphy. And in that first meeting, having read the paper, Ken agreed to, for the first time in that organisation, fund and invest the organisation's first diversity and inclusion permanent role. So that in itself felt like an amazing win, because it had just been kind of following a thread that I felt passionate about, that I had a lot of energy for, that I'd been doing kind of in my own time inside of the desk with colleagues. And then we managed to get this role agreed. But yeah, little did I know, I actually applied for the role and interviewed for it the day that I went into labour. So
oh my goodness.
Yes, it was a busy week. The interview happened before the labour.
Thank goodness for that. Hey?
Yes. Yeah, but I was lucky to work in an organisation that believed in what I was bringing to the table, and that obviously had a really clear mandate then for diversity and inclusion. So when I came back from maternity leave, was really clear on some of the things that we needed to address and to start working on. And since then, my role has kind of grown in remit. So as you mentioned, I'm head of diversity and inclusion for our international markets in Walgreens Boots Alliance, now part of the central team, since we've since merged with Walgreens in the US. So really lucky to work with a team in the US, gain some insight into their expertise, their best practices, their experiences, but also to now have established a community of practice internationally with some amazing people representing each of the divisions for the markets that we operate across here.
Fantastic. Wow. What a story. What a story. I can't believe
I know, it doesn't really feel real. As I retell it doesn't really feel real. It was one of those dream moments, really.
But it's just incredible. It's incredible to see that passion realized and to be recognized by someone that really truly believes in the initiatives. And I mean, what's fascinating, as I know we've spoken about this before, but you kind of watch where the world of business has come from over the last couple of years, and there being more individuals that are solely responsible for D&I, which is fantastic. But there are still organizations, and large organizations at that don't have individuals who are purely focused on D&I. And I think, oh my goodness, how on earth is that the situation? So on one hand, we have come so far, which is great, mainly backed by having individuals in the C-suite and exec team who are really bought into this, because I think it is very, very difficult to push forward an agenda as you have, unless you are one, demonstrating the reason, the rationale behind it, and two, not having that kind of that C-suite and CEO buy-in. Very, very hard to get it to filter down the organisation. But no, that's absolutely fantastic to hear, and a brilliant story there. And I know you are very, very keen when it comes to not only articulating, you're being able to articulate your purpose, but being able to bring everyone else along with the ride. And I wonder, when it comes to actually how you promote the D&I activities and how you drive engagement internally, what that kind of looks like when it comes to things like, the purpose and the platforms and things like this that you harness within the wider organisation. Because obviously you've got it's a huge organisation. organization. It's a household name, and you know, not only of course in the States, but over here in the UK. I mean, it's you know, there's a lot of people there to engage.
Yeah, and beyond as well, in Asia and in Chile and Mexico and across Europe. Full disclosure, I think we've still got some work to do in terms of really engaging all of our team members in all of the different industries that we operate in and the different working environments. You know, we have warehouses, distribution centres, stores, support office environments internationally. And so I think that's still one to crack for us, but something definitely the whole team is wanting to work on. We've got some exciting projects that will be launched in the next 1 or 2 months, which will show some of the ways that we're doing that to kind of be much more employee centric and representative of our full teams. I'm quite a purpose-driven person, and actually I think one of the things that's worked well from a D&I strategy perspective is to find a purpose and to kind of link to that. One of the ways we've done that is to think about being really insight-led in what we do. So whether that's using a D&I maturity scale to think about for all of our different divisions, businesses, teams within the organisation, where are they on the D&I maturity curve, and therefore what's going to make the most sense for them as a next step in the D&I plan, or leveraging data that we already have on our people, so engagement survey data, so that we can create an inclusion index and start to be more planful and measured in terms of the progress that we make on inclusion. Or recruitment data, where are some of the pinch points in a recruitment process where we can add a bit more of an intentional lens around driving diversity. And as well, the goal that I mentioned to you earlier, you know, all of our senior leaders across the organisation have this goal around representation of diversity and leadership, and on inclusive climate creation and how they do that within their teams. And I think that helps us to have that purpose around what we're driving for. I think the platforms piece that you mentioned is really important too. For us, platforms are really a way of amplifying the voice of diverse communities within our workforce. So we have started to globalise in the last 12 to 18 months our business resource groups. We've also established a global inclusion council, which has representation of senior leadership across all of the divisions that are mentioned, and they act really as a steering group and advisory board for us as a D&I team. And then beyond that, it's also kind of thinking about where are our partnerships, you know, internally. How can we partner with the communities of expertise, the centres of expertise in HR, to integrate an inclusion lens into the way that we performance manage, the way that we talent manage, the way that we recruit? And externally, who has that expertise that we can tap into, be it Dial, be it, you know, I sit on the advisory board for the British Beauty Council, so that gives me a real kind of industry lens. Or we've worked with partners in Asia and the UK as well to help upskill our own team members on diversity and inclusion.
Wonderful. I mean, it's so incredibly multifaceted, everything that you described there. And I think, and I very much hope those who are listening in, depending on where they're at in the diversity and inclusion maturity curve, as you put it, think that there is something that they can add. You know, this is not a silver bullet situation with D&I. I hear so many leaders saying, okay, what do we need to do? Let's get it done then. And it's like, yes, that's great, but it's like culture. It's a living, breathing, sleeping thing. There is always something that you can do, and there is always another angle to be able to tackle the various different initiatives. And as you put, there is, you know, you've got the Inclusion Council, you've got the Employee Resource Groups, or BRGs as you call them. You know, you've got all of these influencers globally who are really tapped into having these initiatives, and then you're looking at the metrics as well. I mean, it really is, it's a sizable task. And I know you in specific are passionate about the I think this program that you have around parental leave, which I think is I wouldn't say one of the more unusual facets of diversity and inclusion, but one thing I find myself saying time and time again to execs is everyone has got a diversity and inclusion story, whether it be that you are a parent and we're looking at flexible working, whether it is an invisible diversity like social mobility, which is perhaps not so talked about. You know, the classics are people presume sometimes that when we're talking about D&I, that we're naturally just talking about championing women or championing BAME, and it's not that isn't a fantastic thing, but I think taking this more holistic approach, which you and the organisation clearly are doing, is what we need to do, because that way you engage far many more different audiences into the conversation. And I wondered whether you could tell me a little bit more about the parental leave side of things, but it sounds like you're looking at that with both genders, and also what the other employee or business resource groups look like, just in case there's those who are listening in thinking, well, what other employee resource groups can we have, and what else can we do to help, tighten up our strategy and really look at other possibilities here.
Sure. Well, the Parental Leave Transition Coaching Program is led by our Global Brands division. So Suzanne Buck and Carmela Gordon are excellent team members who are leading that program. We work with an external partner. What I like about that program is that it directly worked in response to some feedback that we got from our teams. So we ran a diversity and inclusion survey and some focus groups around, in particular, we were focused on gender. What are some of the barriers to progressing in this organisation? And one of the perceived barriers, real or not, was actually that going through that parental leave transition would have an unwanted impact on career progression. And so we devised this program really to address that directly. So we took that insight, we devised this program, and what it does is pre, during, and post parental leave for any gender. There's group coaching available. We now do it through a virtual webinar, so it's kind of more accessible to our global audiences as well. And it really helps new parents to be really focused and intentional on mitigating any unwanted career progression impact due to this big life change that they're undergoing, and also giving them that well-being support that anybody deserves when going through such a big life stage change, right? And at the same time, it also supports and coaches line managers through some of the things to think about with a real intentional focus around ensuring inclusion of those team members pre, during, and post leave. And we've had amazing feedback from that, both from the kind of individual coaching sessions, but also in the latest engagement survey that was run. It was cited as one of the best things about working for that particular part of the business. So it's not something that we have available everywhere across Walgreen's Boots Alliance, but it's a really good example of meeting a need that's been highlighted locally. And then you mentioned about the other business resource groups. So we've had 10 business resource groups established in the US side of the business for some time, up to 10 years. But we've only just recently, in the last 12 to 18 months, started to internationalize those. So we actually started with Inclusive IT, which really centers around inclusion for a STEM environment where we knew we had lower representation of diversity in some areas, and they've done some amazing work there. And then the Pride Alliance for WBA. So this is a group for the LGBTQ plus community, and they've done some amazing things around celebrating Pride, changing the logos for the first time, influencing internally how we run our policies. We also have a Women of WBA group, and they cooperate globally actually to not just celebrate things like International Women's Day, but to think about on an ongoing basis, how do we meet the needs of men and women to help create that gender balance at all levels of the organisation through peer networking and mentoring, such as lean-in circles, through to kind of more intensive personal development like learning journeys. And then more recently, we've established the BAME Business Resource Group in the UK, and also the Disability Inclusion Group, both centred on ensuring that those communities are really well served from a workforce perspective, and that we're highlighting any issues or areas where we need to embed better inclusion nudges into the way that we do things here. But also, just as importantly, that we're better understanding our consumers from those communities as well, and that we're better able to meet the needs of those consumers with an intentional focus and lens.
That's excellent, and that is just so relevant for business, for good, and also driving profit. I mean, I know we talk a lot about the business case, and people say, oh, there's a business case for diversity and inclusion, but that is absolutely critical, isn't it? All those untapped markets that we are not considering, if we aren't considering the diversities of the populations within those certain segments of UK, internationally, wherever. So that's great to hear.
And that's why we call them business resource groups actually here. It's that we see a business value in ensuring that our workforce is engaged, feels valued, feels seen, feels heard, but also great business value in having these groups of, an internal focus groups really advise us on how to improve the way we think about new product development, the way we think about advertising our products, the way we think about recruitment campaigns.
Excellent. And in terms of just finally, because I'm conscious that I could sit here and quite happily talk to you forever and a day, but just quickly before we move into kind of a lightning round where I'd love to ask you a number of questions, and we'll give you 30 seconds to answer each. I wonder whether you just could very, very quickly kind of touch on allyship, because I know that's something that you've done a lot within, and I guess that fits really, really well with the fact that actually, you've got a number of senior execs and others who are pinning their colours to the mast and meeting up at frequent times to discuss and drive forward the agenda. But I think one of the ways certainly that I have noticed inclusion being driven far faster is through having allies and making sure individuals know that everyone can be involved. It doesn't just need to be that you are BME or you're female,
Yes.
therefore you can't get involved. But talk me through very briefly kind of the allyship piece and the importance of that internally.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work around thinking about who's accountable for D&I, and I think we've got to a good place where we've got, from an organisational perspective, we've embedded those inclusion nudges into our people processes in many areas, and we'll continue to do that. From a leadership perspective, I mentioned we've now got this goal in place for leaderships, and we're partnering with those leaders to think about how that can show up in their teams. But one part that I think is often overlooked is the power that we have as individuals to create the conditions around us where others can really thrive and be themselves and feel kind of comfortable being themselves and like they're being valued too. And that's where I think allyship really plays a part. So we have really great senior allies where they will become executive sponsors of our business resource groups, for example, and to your point, really show their commitment and help navigate the complexity of working in a global organisation to get things done for those business resource groups. But actually, any team member in any team, in any location can be an ally just by thinking intentionally about what power they have. We talk about privilege. We talk about actually people's response to privilege can be quite an uncomfortable response. We sometimes as individuals don't feel like we carry privilege because we know the good things that we've experienced, but we also know the hard times we've experienced, and that sometimes doesn't feel as privileged. But that level of self-awareness to be able to say, actually, here are some of the things I'm grateful for. Here's some of the small power that I have, and therefore here's how I can use it to support those that don't have that same power. We all carry some level of privilege, and I think we can use it to be better allies. And that can just be, more often than not, through being a really active listener. I think sometimes people are intimidated by the thought of being an ally because it feels like you need to have all the answers about everything and know exactly the right things to say and know exactly the things to avoid saying. But a big part for me of being an ally and an effective ally, and I'm still working at it as should everybody really, is to be open-minded, to ask questions and to really listen, because I could never know what your experience is or what Tom's experience is or what Adam's experience is. I need to question and listen, and only then can I truly understand where I can be of use in terms of using my power effectively. So there's lots more to be done on allyship. I think the BRGs are helping us to do that. I think some of that senior leader endorsement is helping us to do that. But I almost wouldn't wait for that. I think there's something about, parking your own ego and thinking from a self-awareness perspective, what are some of the things I can do differently? And I'd certainly recognise, again, full disclosure, that I tend to interrupt a lot. I get excited by ideas and then I'll just interrupt and I'll go with it. But actually there's something powerful about stopping to be self-aware of that and thinking, as much as I'm trying to show excitement for what you're saying, I'm actually undermining you by interrupting. So we can all make those small differences that add up to a really inclusive climate.
Oh my goodness, I do that exact same thing, Fiona, that exact same thing. It was all I could do not to say, oh, and me too, whilst you were telling that story. I absolutely love it. And I'm sure you ask anyone from our team, they'd say, yeah, Leila does that all the time. And you're right. On a serious note, we must be aware of these things. But no, I absolutely concur. I think, really it's just acknowledging that none of us are perfect. We are all learning. Life is a constant learning journey, isn't it? And so we all have our unique idiosyncratic brilliant things to bring to the table, and we all have things that we can learn better. And yes, it is I think sometimes as you put it, putting the ego away and just being a little bit modest and human about it. But without further ado, I'm going to go into asking some lightning round questions, because otherwise you and I shall be here forever and a day, jabbering away about how much we love D&I and B, which I always love speaking to you, because you always make me think about lots of other things that I want to talk about. So anyhow, lightning round. Fiona, biggest question first. 30 seconds only for each question.
I've already told you I'm a talker. This is going to be hard.
That's what I'm telling you. It's 30 seconds for each. If you spill over a little, it's okay. I'll forgive you because it's you.
Okay.
But first of all, biggest question first. What has been your secret to success? Especially for those who are listening in, be it they are on the first career rung of the ladder, or still studying, thinking what they want to do. What's been the secret to success? Because you really have, made some big waves in your career to date.
I still feel like there's a long way to go, but I think so far what I've found works for me is defining my own success, not being led by what somebody else sees as successful, and which for me also includes kind of striking a good balance, but also doing work that feels meaningful and purposeful. So I'd say follow the work or projects that align with your purpose, align with your values, that light a fire in your belly.
Mm-hmm. I think it is so important to have that fire in the belly. It is, it helps you get up every day to go to work, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And secondly, what is authentic leadership to you?
I think some of what we talked about before. So actually somebody who shows vulnerability, who genuinely seeks diverse perspectives, who opens up when there's a challenge, who actually asks and accepts help and recognizes that they don't have all the answers. And then I think more and more so in today's time, what I see as really authentic leadership is having that employee centricity. So making the time to understand an individual, their background, their circumstances, and challenging your own assumptions about them, not just thinking, okay, here's a woman, I need to treat her in this way, or here's a pregnant woman, I need to treat her in this way, etc., etc.
And who's inspired you the most throughout your career, or indeed your life?
I think from a kind of big famous inspiration, I would have to say Sheryl Sandberg. She was the person that had ignited this interest and passion in me back when I watched her TED Talk however many years ago it was, and then read Lean In. And I'm pleased to say we're launching Lean In circles at Walgreens Boots Alliance. And I think since then, some of the things that she said in that book, she's revised, and I appreciate that kind of vulnerability to have changed her mind about some things. But I try and find inspiration in the day-to-day, really. So whether it's my sister or my friends who kind of are real cheerleaders for each other and for me, my husband, who's an absolute real partner in everything that we do, and we kind of champion each other to lift each other up. My son, who just surprises me every day, the team that I have around me. So I think it's important to find inspiration in the everyday, especially in a role like this where it can kind of be very up and down.
Oh goodness, absolutely. Oh, that's so lovely, so lovely. And I personal, professional, the line is getting ever more blurred given the current scenario that we're living in. And so I think, absolutely critical to look at just the everyday and not these, wonderful inspirations, but inspirations that I guess could be deemed as so far out and away from what we live in the now, yes, that perhaps that they feel less achievable. And finally, I wondered if you were going to go back in time and to give the young, or well, you're still very young actually anyway, but if you were to give the very young Fiona any advice or guidance, or indeed if it was to be someone who's tuning in thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do when I am older, what advice might you give to them?
I think based on my experience, I'd say don't set invisible, arbitrary limits on yourself. I had imagined a very small world for myself with relatively low expectations, and I was very reliant on what others' observations were of me or others' feedback. And I think you need to have that self-belief internally so that you're less rocked by external factors. And if you dream kind of bigger, then you can really, the possibilities are endless. I always felt like things just kind of happen to you and then you just make do, but actually you have the opportunity to create opportunities for yourself and to create kind of future that you feel passionate about. So I'd say kind of trying as early as possible to really believe that, because it can make a difference to your career and to your personal life.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's been an absolute joy having you here on the show. So thank you very much for taking the time out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation with you, Leila.
You're most welcome. And just before we go, as I always do, a very quick summary. And there's been so many great things actually in the conversation today. Lots of golden nuggets of wisdom that I hope people can take away with them. As Fiona said so articulately, it really depends where you're at when it comes to your diversity, inclusion, belonging, maturity curve. And don't feel concerned if you feel perhaps we're behind on certain things. Look, no one is perfect. Every business is growing. We're living through a very challenging time at the moment. So be kind to yourself, be kind to your business, but keep pushing on in a collaborative way. Inclusion absolutely is the heart and soul of everything that we do. And I think humanity and really being true to ourselves and our businesses and our values is ever more important as we go through unprecedented times like this. So take stock, look at the employee resource groups or the business resource groups, which is a great way to put it, because this really is business imperatives that we're talking about here. But have a look at the organization. There's so many people within the business at exec level who I'm sure you can bring into a cohort almost, as Fiona and Walgreen Boots Alliance have done. Make sure you utilize and harness the power and the influence they have. You don't need to do everything yourself. And as a D&I practitioner, it's often quite challenging because you're working across so many different areas. As Fiona said there, in one breath kind of is talking literally about, international zones, being able to actually influence people at all different levels. I mean, there's so many different things here, so many different employee resource groups, and you're often relying on people to be doing things in addition to their day job. And so make sure you harness everything that you can. And, look, it's you're not there by yourself. Clearly, there's so many positive things that you can do if you have, as Fiona says, the fire in the belly, and you really find and harness your sense of purpose. So find that confidence if you haven't got it already, and really try and tap into what truly you can actually do. Anyhow, it's been a privilege having Fiona on the show, so I will summarize and say thank you very, very much. We are with you here twice a week at the moment to support everyone in times of uncertainty, so you can tune into the podcast on Tuesday or Thursdays, which is double our usual weekly podcast for the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show. All of the show notes and all the information that Fiona has spoken about today will be in the show notes at the end of today's show, so don't worry if you've not managed to write everything down. You can visit us at www.dahlglobal.org/podcast. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show with Dahl Global. Take care and stay safe. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.